It started with a headline that made the nation pause its scroll. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett escorted off Bill Maher set after fiery exchange goes off the rails. And if you think late-night television is all jokes, laughter, and safe conversations, think again. Because what unfolded inside the Real Time studio that night wasn't comedy. It was confrontation. It was raw, unfiltered democracy cracking under the spotlight. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. Let's see how far tonight's conversation travels. Friday night, 9:57 p.m. Bill Maher adjusted his tie, that familiar smirk forming before cameras rolled. The HBO stage gleamed under golden lights, polished with floors, city skyline backdrop shimmering behind him. The crowd murmured in anticipation. They expected laughs, maybe a few political jabs. But what they got instead felt like a live courtroom, and Maher wasn't ready for the witness he just called. That witness was Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, Texas firebrand and one of Capitol Hill's sharpest legal minds. Known for her fiery debates, quick rebuttals, and refusal to let condescension slide, Crockett had become a favorite among younger viewers who were tired of performative politics. Maher, on the other hand, had built his empire on the very opposite: provocation. His rule: make them laugh and make them think, even if it burns a few bridges along the way. But tonight, that formula met its match. The night's headline topic flashed across the screen: political accountability in an age of double standards. Maher's panel included a veteran conservative pundit, a tech entrepreneur talking AI and elections, and Crockett, the only elected official on stage. At first, the banner was routine: jokes about campaign finance, viral memes, the absurdity of billion-dollar donors shaping democracy. But then Maher leaned forward, pen twirling in his fingers like a blade. "Congresswoman, you talk a lot about justice and transparency," he said. "Yet your own party's finances look like a maze of luxury retreats and influencer deals. Are you really fighting corruption or just branding it better?" The audience chuckled, that half-nervous laughter when they sensed blood. Crockett didn't flinch. Her eyes narrowed. When she finally spoke, her voice carried that deliberate calm that precedes a storm. "Bill, if you're going to talk money, let's talk all the money, not just a side you find convenient." A ripple went through the audience. Even Maher's smirk faltered. That was a first spark. Every camera angle shifted closer. The producer knew this was television gold. But the tone in the room had changed. Laughter evaporated, replaced by the silence of spectators realizing they were watching something real. Maher tried to pivot, cracking a joke about lawyers who moonlight as moral philosophers. Crockett didn't laugh. She leaned forward, elbows on the desk, and said, "Bill, you invite politicians to your show for comedy. I get that. But the moment you cross from jokes into false claims, you're playing with people's trust. And that's no joke where I come from." The audience applauded, spontaneous, sharp, and unmistakably on her side. Maher's eyes flickered. For the first time in the episode, he was losing control of his own stage. Behind the cameras, producers scrambled. One whispered into Maher's earpiece, "Keep it civil. We're trending already." The control room lit up with alerts. Social feeds were clipping Crockett's response before the show even aired. Hashtag Maher vs. Crockett was already moving on X, former Twitter. But Maher, ever the provocateur, doubled down. "Congresswoman, I'm all for holding power accountable. But don't you think the outrage machine, your followers included, is addicted to feeling offended? Doesn't that pay your bills just as much as mine?" Crockett inhaled slowly. The audience froze. Then she delivered a line that would echo through every highlight reel of the week. "Offense doesn't pay my bills, Bill. Integrity does. Try it sometime, it's tax-free." The crowd erupted. Standing ovation, laughter, and applause collided into chaos. Maher tried to speak over it, but the noise swallowed his voice. Somewhere in the control booth, a voice cracked through the headset. "We've lost time. Go to break. Go to break now." But Bill Maher didn't call for a break. He leaned forward instead, that half-grin morphing into defiance. No, let's not cut away. I think America needs to see what happens when politicians can't take a joke." Crockett straightened her posture. And I think America needs to see what happens when hosts confuse humor with harassment. That line landed like a gavel. The crowd's reaction split, half cheering, half gasping. Even the tech entrepreneur on the panel shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Maher stood up. Crockett did too. Two opposing forces under the same glare of studio light. Him, the seasoned comedian whose stage had crushed countless egos. Her, the congresswoman who refused to bow even when outnumbered. The conservative pundit tried to mediate. Maybe we should. But Crockett's next words cut through everything. You invited me here to discuss accountability, Bill. Let's start with yours. How much of your show's ad revenue comes from the same corporations lobbying against climate reform while you pretend to care on air? The studio went silent. Maher blinked, caught off guard. The audience murmured. Someone shouted, "Answer her." He didn't. He laughed instead. But it wasn't his usual confident laugh. It was nervous, defensive. "I think we're done here," he said finally. "Thank you, Congresswoman." But Crockett wasn't finished. "Of course we are. That's what happens when truth walks onto a comedy set." The audience rose to its feet again, but this time, the cheers weren't unanimous. Some booed, others clapped, and others pulled out phones, recording every second. Producers waved for security. The segment clock had blown past its slot. Maher, red-faced, turned toward the control booth and shouted off mic, "Cut to break." But before the cameras went dark, the microphones caught one last exchange. "Maher, you don't tell me how to run my show." Crockett, "I just did and America saw it." Static, music, fade to black. When the show returned from break, the seat where Jasmine Crockett had sat was empty. The crowd buzzed with whispers. Maher looked visibly shaken, flipping his cue cards like a man trying to restart the universe. "Well," he said with a forced chuckle, "that was spirited." Laughter, uneasy. But viewers at home knew something serious had just happened, because within minutes, clips of the altercation were flooding every social platform. Hashtags multiplied. Commentators pounced. And the real story, the one about who was right, was just getting started. The moment the episode cut to commercial, chaos took over the studio floor. Bill Maher walked offstage, muttering to his producer. Staffers sprinted toward the audience rows, asking people to stop recording. Too late. Half the crowd was already uploading clips, captions blazing. Crockett destroys Maher's own show. Congresswoman kicked out after exposing corruption on live TV. And just like that, the real show, the one off air, had begun. By 10:32 p.m., before the West Coast feed had even aired, the internet was on fire. Hashtags exploded. Hashtag Maher versus Crockett. Hashtag integrity on air. Hashtag who got owned. Clips of the exchange, grainy phone angles, and shaky audience footage began racking up millions of views. On YouTube, reaction channels were dissecting every frame like forensic analysts. One creator froze the exact moment Maher's smile vanished. Another slowed down Crockett's rebuttal, overlaying captions like, "The look of real fear." Twitter users, journalists, and celebrities jumped in. Some praised Crockett for holding a millionaire media mogul accountable live on air. Others accused her of being too emotional, too political, too direct. But one thing united them all. Everyone was talking about it. For the first time in years, Real Time with Bill Maher wasn't trending for its satire. It was trending for scandal. While social media dissected every second, HBO's executive floor turned into a war room. Producers replayed the footage from every camera angle, trying to decide what could legally air. Publicists drafted 3 versions of the same statement. One to apologize, one to defend, and one to say nothing at all. Maher's longtime executive producer, a veteran of late-night crises, leaned back in his chair and muttered, "We've had politicians storm out before, but this feels different." Different because it was... Jasmine Crockett wasn't a celebrity guest or comedian. She was a sitting member of Congress, and her departure from the stage wasn't scripted. That meant everything she said, every accusation, could have real-world consequences. By midnight, Crockett broke her silence. In a brief but pointed post, she wrote, When truth makes people uncomfortable, they usually reach for the off button. I didn't walk off that stage. I was escorted off for speaking facts. Accountability isn't optional. 10 words later, her post hit over 4 million views. That one paragraph turned her into a symbol of defiance overnight. Talk shows, news anchors, and podcasts scrambled to book her for interviews. Her name topped Google Trends. And somewhere in Los Angeles, Bill Maher was realizing that his own brand of unfiltered honesty had finally met someone who could match it and win. The next morning, Maher's team released a controlled statement. Real Time is a space for honest, unedited debate. Sometimes conversations get passionate, and we regret that things escalated. We respect Congresswoman Crockett's commitment to public service and hope for future dialogue. But online, the tone was very different. Viewers flooded his comments with disbelief. Future dialogue? You literally kicked her off. Bill, accountability starts with your own microphone. The more he tried to contain the story, the more it spread. Clips of him shouting "cut to break" became memes overnight. Remixes, slow-mos, TikTok challenges. By Saturday morning, Maher wasn't just trending. He was being roasted on the very platform he'd mastered. Talk radio hosts replayed the altercation like a courtroom exhibit. Some argued Crockett had crossed a line, turning Maher's stage into a political ambush. Others said Maher's defensiveness revealed his bias. One commentator summarized it best. What you saw wasn't about left or right. It was about power. A man used to controlling the narrative finally met someone who refused to play by his rules. The internet agreed. Polls on social media showed nearly 78% of respondents believed Crockett had won the exchange. Her approval ratings among young voters surged. Clips of her saying, "Integrity doesn't need applause," were being turned into motivational edits across TikTok. Even on Capitol Hill, whispers spread through congressional halls. Crockett's colleagues sent private messages of support and curiosity. Everyone wanted to know what really happened when the cameras stopped rolling. A leaked backstage clip surfaced the next day. It showed Maher pacing in the hallway, visibly frustrated, saying, "I'm not going to let her hijack my show for politics." A stagehand replied, almost off mic, "But that's what you invited her for, isn't it?" The clip went viral instantly, and that single sentence flipped public perception completely. It no longer looked like a political argument. It looked like a silencing. Crockett, the guest who came to debate, was framed as the voice the network couldn't handle. Hashtags morphed again. Hashtag let her speak. Hashtag truth interrupted. Hashtag real time meltdown. Maher's peers, comedians, and talk show hosts across networks were forced to comment. Jimmy Kimmel joked, "Usually, I'm the one getting in trouble for talking too much. Guess Bill took that crown." Stephen Colbert, more serious, noted, "If your guest is making you sweat, maybe they're saying something worth hearing." Even Jon Stewart, long considered the elder statesman of political satire, weighed in. Comedy is supposed to challenge power, not protect it. Suddenly, Maher found himself not just fighting Crockett, but standing isolated in an industry built on speaking truth to power. Ironically, the controversy caused Real Time's ratings to soar. The network reported its highest live viewership in nearly 3 years. But what executives celebrated as a win, Maher recognized as something darker. People weren't tuning in for comedy anymore. They were tuning in for conflict. Clips of Crockett's lines dominated algorithmic recommendations. Her appearance was being studied in communication courses, discussed in activist circles, and replayed on political podcasts. And somewhere deep down, Maher knew the worst part wasn't losing control of the show. It was losing the narrative. 3 days later, Jasmine Crockett appeared on a rival talk show, The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. The studio audience erupted the moment she walked out. She laughed, waving them down modestly. Colbert leaned in. "So, what really happened on Maher's stage?" Crockett smiled. "I was invited to talk accountability. I did that. The problem wasn't my tone, it was the truth." The crowd roared. Colbert nodded, sensing he was sitting beside viral lightning. "You realize you might have just changed the whole playbook for politicians on talk shows?" Crockett shrugged. Then maybe the playbook needed a rewrite. That line alone generated hundreds of thousands of reposts overnight. And within 24 hours, Crockett rewrite became a meme phrase for any moment someone flipped power dynamics on live TV. But not everyone cheered. Veteran political analysts called her behavior disrespectful. One op-ed in the New York Post titled, "When Decorum Dies on Live Television," argued that Crockett's anger represents the death of civil discourse. Her supporters clapped back immediately. No, it represents the rebirth of honesty. This tug-of-war between narrative and truth amplified the story even more. Cable news anchors devoted entire segments to replaying the clip. Debate shows hosted panels of psychologists, comedians, and politicians analyzing what went wrong with Bill Maher's control. But beneath the media noise, one undeniable pattern emerged. People were rooting for the underdog. Crockett had walked into a space built for elite conversations and turned it into a people's courtroom. She spoke their frustrations out loud. She embodied defiance wrapped in composure. And no amount of punditry could take that image away. According to one insider, Maher refused interviews for days. He canceled 2 podcast tapings, avoided press, and reportedly told close friends, "She didn't beat me with outrage, she beat me with logic." That admission alone revealed the heart of the story. It wasn't about who shouted louder. It was about who stayed grounded when the spotlight burned hottest. And Crockett had done just that. For years, Maher's show symbolized dominance. Comedians mocking politicians, not the other way around. But that night inverted everything. It wasn't just a viral confrontation. It was a cultural shift. Viewers weren't laughing at politics anymore. They were demanding accountability through it. And Jasmine Crockett had become the face of that transformation. As one trending tweet put it, "When comedy meets consequence, the truth gets the last laugh." When the dust settled on the weekend, nobody expected the storm to last through Monday. But it did, and it only grew louder. By sunrise, the story wasn't just a trending clip. It had become a national conversation about power, truth, and what it really means to speak freely in America. Morning shows replayed the footage on loop. CNN, MSNBC, and Fox all ran it, each with their own spin. CNN called it the most riveting political moment on television this year. Fox News described it as a meltdown disguised as bravery. And MSNBC simply ran the cheering. The night accountability spoke back. Every anchor had an opinion. Some accused Maher of arrogance. Others painted Crockett as overly combative. But behind all the noise, audiences were glued. Ratings across networks skyrocketed. Talk radio buzzed. YouTube thumbnails flashed red arrows and words like destroyed, exposed, and unmasked. It was a perfect recipe for virality, one that neither Maher nor Crockett had fully anticipated. The viral moment wasn't just a soundbite. It was a turning point. Crockett's 14-second rebuttal, "Integrity doesn't need applause," became a digital anthem. Musicians sampled it. Motivational speakers quoted it. Even corporate TikTok accounts tried to ride the wave, captioning clips of employees standing up to bosses with, "Integrity doesn't need applause." Jasmine said it best. By Tuesday morning, Crockett's social media following had doubled. Maher's, meanwhile, saw a surge in angry comments, half mocking, half demanding an apology. Then came the leak. An anonymous source, believed to be a production staffer, sent an unedited version of the real-time taping to multiple journalists. The file showed something the edited HBO broadcast in, a 20-second exchange that producers had cut. In it, right before security escorted Crockett off, Maher muttered, "You people never know when to stop preaching." The line detonated like dynamite. "You people," viewers repeated online. Screenshots of the transcript spread like wildfire. Context didn't matter. Perception did. And perception had turned Maher into the villain of his own stage. Within hours, hashtags split into camps. Hashtag Stand With Crockett. The movement defending her courage. Hashtag Cancel Maher. Trending across platforms by Wednesday morning. Hashtag Comedy Not Courtroom. Maher's remaining defenders. Each side posted long threads, think pieces, and TikToks dissecting every syllable. The internet had chosen its battlefield. And it wasn't just about a talk show anymore. It was about who controlled the narrative in modern America. the comedian or the Congresswoman. Amid the frenzy, Crockett did something unexpected. She went silent. No interviews. No tweets. No press tours. Her team issued a short statement. The Congresswoman has said what needed to be said. The rest is for the people to decide. That move was genius. While Maher scrambled to defend himself on podcasts and press briefings, Crockett's quiet composure made her appear dignified, even prophetic. Her silence became a mirror reflecting Maher's noise, and audiences noticed. Comment sections filled with variations of one theme. She doesn't need to talk. The truth's already out there. Inside HBO, boardroom doors slammed. Executives debated whether to suspend Maher or double down on creative freedom. Advertisers were calling. Two sponsors, a tech conglomerate and a luxury car brand, quietly pulled upcoming ad placements. A leaked memo revealed the tension inside. We support freedom of expression, but the optics of dismissing a sitting congresswoman on air have created reputational risk. We recommend a controlled on-air clarification. That corporate phrasing meant one thing. Maher had to face the music. The following Friday, Maher returned to his show. The audience's energy felt different, tense, curious, divided. He walked on stage without his usual swagger. Last week's show got heated. He began, pausing for breath. I've been in this business long enough to know that passion can look like hostility when edited into memes. So let's clarify. I respect Congresswoman Crockett, and I regret that things got out of hand. Half the audience clapped. Half stayed silent. Then, almost as if fate had written the script, a man in the front row shouted, "Then invite her back." Maher froze. A small smile crossed his lips, the kind that hides uncertainty. "We'll see," he replied, trying to move on. But it was too late. The crowd had already decided who they believed. That same night, as Maher's episode aired, Crockett posted a single tweet. Some doors close, others open wider. Attached was a teaser for her upcoming appearance on Trevor Noah's new digital talk show, titled Unfiltered. The caption read, "The conversation continues." The internet erupted again. Maher's rating spike evaporated. Every trending topic, every headline, every late-night joke, all revolved around one truth. Jasmine Crockett had turned what was meant to humiliate her into a career-defining moment. But behind the applause and viral fame, the emotional weight was real. Close friends revealed Crockett was exhausted. "She's proud, yes," one aide said, "but the hate mail, the threats, the trolling, it's brutal." Still, she refused to back down. Her mantra to her team became, "If truth costs you peace, pay the price." That line would later open her memoir, but at this moment, it was simply her armor. Maher, meanwhile, retreated further. Friends said he spent nights rereading scripts, replaying old interviews, and wondering when the line between comedy and cruelty had blurred. He wasn't canceled, but he wasn't celebrated either. He was, for the first time in his career, uncertain. What started as one on-air argument now had ripple effects across media. Other hosts became cautious. Producers reviewed guest protocols. Networks began holding sensitivity roundtables. Even comedians known for biting satire added disclaimers before political segments. And every discussion circled back to one night, the Crockett-Maher Showdown. Public schools debated using the clip to teach communication ethics. College essays were written about it. Influencers used it as shorthand for standing your ground. It was no longer about who was right or wrong. It had become a cultural symbol. 2 weeks later, Maher agreed to a special joint interview on PBS. His first appearance alongside Crockett since that infamous night. Producers pitched it as a conversation about discourse. When the cameras rolled, they sat across from each other, the tension palpable but civil. Maher began quietly, "Congresswoman, you were right about one thing. I confuse humor with defensiveness." Crockett nodded, measured but gracious. "And I was wrong about one thing, too. I assumed accountability and comedy couldn't coexist. Maybe they can." For a brief moment, the air softened. Two public figures, once at war, acknowledging humanity on live television. It didn't erase what happened, but it reframed it. Still, the internet didn't care about peace. It wanted drama. Clips of the handshake went viral, but with ironic captions. The sequel nobody asked for. The culture had moved on, but the lesson lingered. In the weeks that followed, ratings normalized. New guests filled the stage. But nothing quite matched the electricity of that night Jasmine Crockett faced Bill Maher under the lights. Because somewhere deep in the public consciousness, that moment became a modern parable. When power mocks accountability, truth fights back, and sometimes truth wins on live television. The night that began as just another round of jokes and monologues had already burned itself into television history. But what came afterward, the silence, the lessons, the reckoning, proved even louder than the clash itself. Weeks had passed. Bill Maher was back to his usual rhythm. Sharp one-liners, smirking commentary, a crowd eager to laugh again. Yet even as the cameras rolled, something in the air had shifted. He wasn't the same man who once dismissed his critics with a shrug. Now, his pauses were longer. His jokes landed softer. Each time a guest challenged him, the memory of Jasmine Crockett's unwavering stare seemed to echo somewhere in the back of his mind. Maher's show survived, but his invincibility didn't. Across the country, Crockett's life had changed in ways even she couldn't have predicted. Her team received thousands of letters, handwritten ones from single mothers, teachers, and veterans thanking her for saying what we wish we could say. She had gone from being a congressional rising star to something else entirely, a cultural reference point. Professors quoted her in lectures about ethics and power. Clips of her confrontation were used in media training workshops. And online, her name had become shorthand for courage under pressure. Don't fold, pull a Crockett, one viral tweet read. But fame came with weight. Crockett confided to a close friend, "It's strange. I didn't plan to start a movement. I just refused to be disrespected." And that, ironically, was what made her movement real. Behind the scenes, HBO executives scheduled a closed-door meeting with Maher. The notes were polite but firm. Brand integrity requires renewed focus on constructive debate. In television language, that meant reinvent yourself or fade out. So, one evening, Maher opened his show with an unexpected admission. You know, sometimes it takes losing control to realize what control really means. I lost mine a few weeks ago, and maybe that was the best thing that could have happened. The audience applauded cautiously. He continued, his tone stripped of sarcasm. We comedians like to think we're immune to accountability because we hide behind laughter. But laughter doesn't excuse arrogance. It wasn't a full apology, but it was human. And for the first time in a long time, the crowd didn't laugh, they listened. A month later, Jasmine Crockett returned to Los Angeles. Not for a talk show taping, but for an awards gala honoring women in leadership. She walked the red carpet to flashbulbs and chants of Congresswoman Jasmine. When asked about Maher, she smiled. I don't hold grudges. The goal was never to embarrass anyone. It was to remind people that truth deserves a seat at every table. That quote made headlines again. Not because it was fiery, but because it was graceful. Crockett had managed to transform controversy into credibility. Weeks later, in her congressional office, a sealed envelope arrived. No return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper in Bill Maher's handwriting. Thanks for holding my feet to the fire. Comedy should burn hypocrisy, not truth. B. Crockett chuckled softly and tucked it into a drawer. No cameras, no press, just a quiet acknowledgement between two people who had clashed publicly and learned privately. By year's end, analysts were calling it the Maher effect. Networks began hiring consultants to train hosts in emotional intelligence interviewing. Talk shows shifted tone, less ambush, more accountability. Podcasts dissected the Crockett-Maher clash as the moment late-night TV grew up. And in classrooms across America, teachers replayed the confrontation not as entertainment, but as a case study in composure. Students debated, when does confidence become arrogance? When does truth become too uncomfortable to air? The answers were never simple. But one thing was certain. Television would never be the same. The final episode of Real Time that year opened with a striking monologue. Maher looked directly into the camera and said, "We live in an age where outrage sells faster than honesty. But maybe honesty is a comeback tour comedy didn't know it needed. He paused, smiled faintly, and added, and to the Congresswoman from Texas, thanks for the reminder. The audience erupted, not in mock applause, but in genuine respect. Jasmine Crockett watched that broadcast from her hotel room in Washington. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Friends sending clips, reporters asking for statements. But she didn't reply. Instead, she whispered to herself, "Good. He got it." Then she closed her laptop, exhaled, and prepared for her next morning hearing. Back to the job she'd been elected to do. Because that was the lesson all along. The fight was never about television. It was about truth finding its way through the noise. Cut to the real-time stage. Empty seats, lights dimmed, crew packing up for the night. A stagehand muttered, "Crazy how one episode changed everything." Another replied, "Yeah, but that's what live TV's for, to remind us what's real." Fade to black. Then, a final on-screen message. In an age where applause is easy and accountability is rare, choose integrity. Do you think Bill Maher was wrong to cut the debate short? Or did Jasmine Crockett go too far in demanding accountability on live television? Drop your thoughts below. Let's talk about what real freedom of speech looks like.